All right, so our presenters today are Glizcel, Michael, Jamie, Mikael, and Dave. However, at this time, I would like to turn the floor over to Glizcel. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Again, I'm super thrilled to have this conversation today. We've got a great group of panelists here. I did want to start out by just introducing myself. My name is Glizcel Ditto, and I am the Executive Director here at HRSoft. I'll go ahead and pass it around the table for each of us to introduce ourselves as well. Kyle?
Awesome. Thank you, Glizcel. So, Mikael Silegren, I'm the Senior Director of Product at HRSoft. We are a compensation management platform that helps organizations optimize and streamline their compensation lifecycle management. I've been in the industry for a number of years, and I've worked with all sizes of companies in helping their HR digital transformation journeys. Michael, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to spend time with this group today. At Deloitte, for my clients, I help think about that relationship that organizations are trying to foster with their workforce and the workforce's family, showing up in the total rewards offerings that the organization is making available, the well-being framework, structure, support system made available to that employee and his or her families, and then finally recognition for a job well done, sort of that intimate connection that exists between the worker and the organization, and looking forward to engaging in this conversation, sharing thoughts and feedbacks from that. I'll turn it over to Dave.
Thanks, Michael. Dave Christison, Vice President of Marketing at Awardco. We are an employee rewards and recognition platform. Been here about a year. Customers typically come to us to help solve employee engagement issues, help incentivize a high-performance culture across the whole employee journey, and really excited to be part of this panel. Before my time with Awardco, I spent time as a venture-backed startup founder and different startups, and really excited to be participating in this today.
I'm Jamie Newton. I'm the founder and managing director of TRS, which effectively stands for Total Reward Search. And so the clue's in the title there. So we run a search firm exclusively focused in the total rewards market in the United States. And I've been personally hiring executive talent in total rewards for 11 years for my sins. So I spend every day speaking with total rewards professionals and getting a real deep understanding of the market. So delighted to be here today.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And just for everybody on the line as well, we will be taking questions through the Q&A, as Ruth had mentioned. I'll try to keep an eye on that as well if there are any questions that come up that we may want to answer during the session, but we'll definitely leave some time at the end for questions. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I do want to start with a poll first. So you should have a poll that will pop up on your screen right now. We want to just get a feel for where the audience is right now. Curious about what aspects of total rewards do you believe needs the most innovation in today's workplace? I'll give you a few seconds to respond to that. All right, it looks like we've got the results in. Kind of interesting. It's actually fairly evenly distributed. Just wanted to get a little bit of take on that, on those responses. Are you surprised by that? I'll kick that off with Jamie.
Yeah, hugely. I thought it was going to be compensation flat out. I think the work-life harmony, I can imagine from a total rewards perspective, that is a link to obviously we're in crazy season for a lot of firms at the moment. And if anyone's come up with a solution to creating a short and well-run comp round, in 11 years, I'm yet to hear it. So I imagine there is a bit of a work-life issue for many compensation practitioners, not just now, but ongoing.
Absolutely. Anybody else? Again, I'm kind of it's interesting to me to see the results the way they've shaped out as well. Anybody else have a comment on that?
I'd love to share. Yeah, Jamie, I thought a little bit of that same thing, work-life harmony. The amount of the team members responding there. In a recent high-impact reward study done by Deloitte, continue to see well-being showing up in a place where both organizations are thinking about that word really differently, and employees are setting different expectations. So the idea of, plans and programs being important, but not being the sole answer to well-being. I wonder if that's playing into the answer from the participants here today.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. So I think with that, let's just go ahead and dive into some of the conversations I know that we were wanting to have around this. I think a lot of us were expecting to see compensation be a little bit higher in the ranking, but also very interesting. Still want to understand, based on where we are today in the landscape of total rewards, direct compensation still remains a main focus for a lot of employees as you're thinking about your total rewards package. So can we talk a little bit about leveraging direct compensation as a differentiator in today's world? And with that, I think we can start off with, again, Jamie to chime in on that and go around the room here.
I think, it's a very good, a place to start really, because we talk about compensation and, in a modern society, are we looking at sort of edging towards it? What is the real differentiator for organizations to be able to sort of offer their employees when it comes to comp? And I think that game's got a lot harder. I think the challenge you have in a sort of a post-COVID, so 21, 22 environment, and then we have the Great Resignation. We have seen, and many organizations continue to see, even in a cooling labor market, fixed compensation, so base pay increase, and that competitive landscape for talent has kind of, we saw a rush that sort of way outstripped the kind of the data margins, the data suppliers in terms of what they were saying people were paying, and actually what clients were willing to pay for talent. And I think it's throughout a lot of larger scale businesses that don't have that kind of luxury to be able to flex and sort of start lumping in, above inflation pay increases. You're competing with smaller firms that can just, right, we're going to pay at the 95th percentile. I think trying to sort of maintain pace with that. You've seen many businesses in 21, 22 who were, top of the market rate payers now finding themselves in the middle of the pack. And so it's what do you do in that situation? It's easier for others. And so, yeah, comp for me remains a huge differentiator, but I think it's a real struggle for firms at the moment to get it right.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Dave, I know you have a slightly different take on it based on the company that you work with. I'm curious on your input on that as well.
Yeah, obviously, what's interesting is with our base pay, with the package and the comp and benefits we have with our teams, whether we like it or not, at some point the financial model dictates, what we can do as a company. And so that leaves us as leaders with the opportunity to find other ways to go above and beyond that traditional comp and benefits package and think about total rewards holistically. And in a post-COVID world, in a hybrid world, in a in-office, return to office, total remote world, whatever it might be, the day-to-day really matters. And that whole total rewards, employee experience, employee engagement really matters. And so what we see in working, we have over 2,500 customers across the globe, 140 countries that we serve, is that there's a term I worked with a total rewards leader, and there's a term I heard her use called emotional salary. There could be opportunities perhaps to help somebody with a boost to their base pay. For some folks, it may not make a difference, but if you take that same amount and put it into programs, incentivized non-cash rewards and recognition on a day-to-day basis, on a monthly basis, whether that's LSA programs, whether that's recognition attached to points with the opportunity to redeem experiences, to work on that work-life harmony with their family, spend that time or those earned points with their family. Those are the things we're seeing in terms of what's that emotional salary, outside of once the financial model dictates what we can pay each other. It's on us as leaders to provide an engaging experience. And so I really like that term. And what we've seen is that non-cash rewards and incentive market grow a ton. 25 years ago, there was only about 1 in 4 businesses that were doing that. Now it's almost north of 85% across the globe, with major money
Wow.
that our companies are putting into non-cash rewards and incentives. So often, if we can't find the budget, quote unquote, to on the traditional base pay, which is very important, we all want that, there are opportunities to allocate budget towards those non-cash rewards and incentives through recognition programs, boosting morale and engagement, and helping employees feel that emotional salary difference in their day-to-day.
That's interesting. I haven't heard that term before, emotional salary. That's actually very telling, and it's interesting to hear some of the creative ways that we're starting to think about that and what that looks like. Still considered part of direct compensation, but kind of, getting into a little bit of that. How does that actually make me feel, and what is that doing for my employees? So that's great. We had mentioned earlier, and I know, Michael, you had actually brought this up in terms of well-being and what that really looks like. So I'm really curious with the attempt to balance inflationary pressures and market competitiveness, how is this now shaping our total reward strategies when we're thinking about what that holistic well-being looks like?
Shared a little bit earlier that we've recently refreshed our 2024 high impact rewards research. Glizcel, the original research was done in 2018, and when you look at what well-being was in 2018 and now 2024 post-pandemic environment, we saw a lot of shifts in the data. 2018. Still really a focus on the physical condition. It was called well-being, but it was really sort of traditionally that wellness point of view. And then things changed. And if you look at the research now, what we're seeing is organizations laser focused on the continued support of the physical condition, but then thinking about building and maintaining financial acumen, looking to help employees build financial independence, mental health and emotional resilience. I mean, there's so many ways that organizations are understanding their responsibility in helping show up and support their workforce in ways that are going to create differentiated experiences, are going to create an employee relationship that becomes unbreakable. There's another part of it, though, right? That it's not just plans and programs. Those are becoming a lot of table stakes. But this idea of supporting well-being at both the individual, the team, and the leadership level to make sure that there's a communication and an expectation of behaviors, of ways of working across the organization that supplement the plans and programmatic support to really create this culture of well-being that I think organizations have been talking about, but it's really coming into the reality now. It's a lot of what our data is supporting.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned specifically the culture of well-being, and I think that's huge because I think, to your point, it used to be more about what more programs can we offer, what can we give them in the list of the menu of things that we can offer there. But I think it goes well beyond that. Dave, I think you have a little bit of an additional take to that. Again, just coming from where you are in the offerings as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously we need to recognize and incentivize well-being at times. And we've done that, and we've done that in traditional manners across our companies before. And so what we see, the application of this in the real world is using recognition or engagement programs, specifically rewards and recognition programs, to incentivize whether it's the gym membership appearances, whether it's the getting a monthly or a yearly physical. We've seen some of our customers using points to reward and recognize those. We've even had customers who in terms of well-being and trying to establish wellness and healthy habits, post pictures on a feed of 7 colors that they're eating across meals, just to kind of incentivize this. We're in this together. We're healthy. But what we've seen, if a behavior is not recognized and incentivized, it's not going to happen. We're humans at the end of the day, and so people might think of traditional rewards and recognition as, well, it's the pins, it's the plaques, it's the crystal globe at 10 years that I get. It's actually, again, it's that day-to-day incentive and recognition to help people make choices and reward those choices and recognize those choices. So we see that across a number of well-being programs. And then the other area, obviously AI is on top of everybody's mind. We're working with a well-known, provider in the HR space, and we're doing some of this ourselves as well. AI now for the first time allows us to eliminate a lot of barriers to make well-being programs very specific to individuals. Well-being is a very individual mission at times. And so as we have these different data sets across HRIS, across performance data, across perhaps rewards and recognition data, and preferences and profiles of people within our systems, AI now allows us to get the right answers as to how people prefer to roll out their own wellness program for maybe just themselves. That's not things, it's hard to do that at an individual scale. We're seeing companies now and ourselves start to utilize AI to make wellness and well-being a focus on the individual level, because how I think about well-being is going to be different than my teammate who sits next to me. And so if I have personalized programs, that makes a huge difference. And thankfully, AI and our data models can help us achieve that at a personal and a profile level.
That's actually incredible. If you think about it, I mean, in our day-to-day lives today, if you're out there on the internet at all, you get the ads that pop up that are pertinent to the things that you've been looking at. So it makes perfect sense that that actually ties into our employees' experience. So I really love that. I think the other thing that I've also kind of picked up from this is a little bit of, in essence, employee choice. Employees being able to make choices of how they're receiving different types of rewards and whatnot. And I think there's a lot of value in that as well. And in a past life, we used to talk about gamification of HR. That was a big term in the past, but it's kind of become a little bit of an evolution from that. So that's very interesting. Thank you so much. I do want to dive a little bit into a slightly different topic around this. I think we've all seen kind of a recent trend towards equity compensation, sometimes for the masses in an organization. And I know, Jamie, you and I have had some conversations about this in particular. I'm curious, what do you think about this trend and how effective or ineffective it might be, and maybe some of the pitfalls that we need to keep in mind?
Well, okay, you're going to get me started now. No, equity is a subject, and obviously it's a daily subject for me and my team. I think the whole concept of equity or a long-term incentive plan has become kind of not a bit of a joke, but it's getting ridiculous in terms of what we see and what we're seeing sort of employers create as a result of trying to attract and fundamentally, I think in their view, retain talent. I think we've gone down a rabbit hole of vesting schedules that have obviously moved from 12 months or sort of 12-month cliff to quarterly, which I get it, that's perfectly acceptable and understandable for more sort of cash flow for the younger generation. But we're now moving to monthly vestings, and I have several clients that have wanted me to hire heads of TR to manage. And these are pre-IPO firms, monthly vestings. One was even talking about weekly. And you sit there and go, where does this end? The whole concept of a long-term incentive, I mean, that's just dead now, really, isn't it? I think it's not just the frequency of this and the motivation to create these equity plans. It's the foundations they lie on. I see it time and time again of how they're valuing this equity, particularly in pre-IPO. It's pretty sketchy. In the sense of phantom profit units linked to company valuations, offering out shares when your company hasn't made profit for the last 5 years and you're basing these shares on profit. I mean, what are they? I think it's creating a real rift between large traditional organizations and obviously these kind of fast growth, whether it's tech, fintech, and other industries, firms looking to try and attract talent, obviously reduce the pressure on fixed compensation. But I think it's creating this, this sense of instant gratification for kind of a Gen Z coming into the workforce, thinking this is great, versus your larger global brands that have been going 100 years. How do you compete with that? So I think this whole equity dilemma has become a bit of a joke. Because I feel like I see it all going. I can't even condone what you're trying to offer. It just sounds ridiculous. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that, but yeah, I'm pretty negative on the whole thing.
I'd add to that, Jamie, as well. I think I think we're all aware of that trend of that equity, these programs being offered to more and more employees within an organization and broader groups. And we do still see that happening within certain industries, but we're actually seeing an interesting reverse trend in some verticals where they're starting to pull back some of those equity programs to the higher levels again, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is a piece of people are pausing, thinking about these programs. Are they still driving the same outcomes and objectives that they initially were designed for? And when you do go to a much broader organization or broader employee base, are they having the impact anymore at that individual level that you want them to have? So it's an interesting kind of reverse that we're seeing in some sectors where they're pulling back those equity programs to smaller groups again.
Someone said it to me, recently, that we've gone from using equity as an incentive to using equity as a weapon. And I think, that for me kind of says a lot of, what is the actual intention here? Are you retaining, or you're trying to trap people wrongly in some cases? So, I definitely think it's interesting that some companies are pulling back, going, well, hang on a minute, let's just think about this.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And again, to your point, taking it to monthly and even quarterly vesting schedules really kind of takes away from the notion of it being a long-term incentive program at all. I think that those are very interesting points. And I have seen, the pendulum swinging, but I think I saw the pendulum swing quite far to the point of everybody getting some sort of an equity award. And to be honest, how many of those employees actually understand what that actually means and what the potential valuation of that would be? It's really difficult to explain that to the masses as well.
Put it this way, when I'm asking a chief people officer from a firm that can't even explain it themselves, then it creates a bit of a worry about what you're sending to your employees. So, no, I mean, I think the problem is, because it sounds great. If you sit there and say, right, you've got, 6 to 8 years experience, you're coming in as a sort of a junior programmer or whatever that might be, and here's 2 million of equity. God, doesn't that sound amazing? But in reality, it's like someone needs to break that down and go, is this real? And, not more often than not, but frequently it's kind of a bit smoke and mirrors.
Very interesting. Well, with that, I do want to open up another poll for everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and share that on the screen, and you should, again, get a pop-up for that poll. The question is, which external factor has had the biggest impact on your total reward strategy recently? And again, we know that that has likely shifted in recent years, but curious how everyone in the audience would respond to this particular question. All right. Actually, not that surprised. Looks like a large majority are looking at inflation and economic pressures that are really impacting what we're doing here. Any reaction to that? Maybe we can start with Michael on this one.
I love the answer. I looked at them and wondered, is number one going to actually be number one? And you saw that come through. Total rewards, used to have this idea. It's the old set it and forget it. Set your strategy, get your plans and programs, get your vendors, and off you go. And I think what we've seen over the last couple of years is this need to be agile, this need to be flexible, this need to shift your thinking and understand that you need to pivot your rewards to respond to market conditions, both positively and negatively. Yeah, set it and forget it was really good up until 2020, and then dynamic thinking changes, prioritization, reprioritization became the marching orders of HR and the total rewards team. And employees responded well. And so data continues to support this idea that To support business strategy, you need a total reward strategy that's mutually aligned, which means degrees of flexibility and agility, really, really important. And I think the findings here and the responses to the survey amplify that.
Makes sense. Anybody else have any comments on that as well?
I think I just echo what Michael said there about kind of the agility and being flexible. Because I think if we would have done this poll a year ago or 18 months ago, the results might have been very different. And I think that just points to the fact that the pace of change for us is increasingly faster and faster.
Definitely.
And it just reiterates that need that we need to be flexible, we need to be adaptable. And for me, I think the importance of just data, right? Being able to understand these pressures, talking with your vendors, talking with your consultants, so that when you are making strategy shifts and decisions, it is backed by data, and that you've identified the areas that are going to be the biggest or the most impactful for you, right? There's obviously things that are outside of our control. So what are the things that we can control and we can affect as an organization?
I think
Makes
that's a really
total
good
sense.
point.
And again, yep. Sorry,
No,
go
it's
ahead.
a really good point that Michael raised about the data. I think the challenge you have in a market that's moving so quickly, as you say, in the last 12 months, things would have looked very different maybe on that response to this polling question. But when you're asking for data, and most of the time for the current and the historic providers, that data is 6 to 12 months old. That is not, that is not data that anyone needs to make effective decisions. And the challenge you have in these kind of being agile, I completely agree with Michael, on the need for companies to flex. But if you're employing 250,000 staff, how do you be agile? You can't flex up your program or redesign your bonus scheme or go to the board and say, right, the pooling, we're going to do it completely differently. We need a load more money. Yeah, I think there's a real boon for companies that can have that flex and pace, versus the larger businesses that just always have to ride it out. There's not much you can do, really, is there?
Yeah, that's a fair comment, I think. And just with regards to even getting into our next topic, I think this is another area where we've seen a lot of change, a lot of pressure, again, for various reasons. But thinking about pay equity and transparency in particular, with that current focus around pay transparency and pay equity, how is this currently affecting our total rewards communication practices, or really anything with regards to our strategies? And how do you see that potentially evolving with things kind of changing in the world? Just curious on that. And we can start with Michael on this one and maybe pass it over to Jamie.
Love to. Yeah, so either because of public demand or regulations, pay equity, pay transparency is front and center. And so, yeah, our high impact reward study amplified this, the idea that mature organizations are going to continue to drive transparency, both from a pay and then a rewards equity perspective as well, in what they're doing both now and into the future. Equity showing up in pay and benefits, the idea of holding your providers accountable to say, what are we offering, and is it available in the markets where my employees sit, right? Taking that point of view of care and concern for the workforce and making sure that you're driving it from a pay standpoint, and then Glizcel from a communication standpoint. I think one of the biggest learnings is, how much do you as an organization want to bring the message to your workforce versus your workforce using other sources, the glass doors of the other organizations, other people's information that may be accurate or may not be, and your employees utilizing that to make decisions, and to equate their value in the organization based on what they believe is fair compensation for the work being done. I think a lot of organizations have understood that not having a voice here, not being proactive in that voice, is going to be a challenge, because the narrative begins to be owned by somebody else, and they're driving a little bit more transparency into what they offer and what they want to share with the workforce to demonstrate the commitment to the relationship through compensation and rewards. Jamie, would love though to hear your thoughts there.
I think you raise some very good points there, Michael. I think the challenge is, I'm coming at this from a couple of angles. Gender pay reporting in the UK in 2017, was designed as so this is going to change the whole landscape. This is going to evolve and right the wrongs when it comes to gender pay gaps, and maybe we can go down the ethnicity route as well. I mean, look, yeah, and then you have the EU pay directive. Obviously, it was the big topic of conversation at World at Work this year. It's coming. It's coming. It's going to happen in the US. It is already in a couple of states, but it's going to go further. You're going to see sort of larger, organizations, as well as, sort of your very high net worth, sort of firms wanting to try and get ahead of this. I think it's coming. We have to embrace it. I do agree with controlling the narrative. But for me, I think it's not just sort of trying to understand your internal pay equity issues in terms of your gender pay gaps. It's kind of, well, what are you going to do about it? I think the big disappointment for us in the UK was, when gender pay came out and people started reporting on it, all the papers were throwing out numbers like baseball scores, and literally on the front headline of papers, all these hedge funds. There was a bit of, well, tell us something we don't already know, because we kind of know that there's a big pay gap in some of these larger financial institutions. But then there was like, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? And even with some great measures, the actual moving of that dial, it takes years to address pay gaps. It's not an instantaneous fix, and there are some great tools out there, but I still think, it all depends. I think people need to get ahead of it, but also need to think, well, what are we really going to do about it? When we find these gaps, what do we do?
And to your point, I think it's really so much about the messaging behind that and shaping the narrative and ensuring that the employees actually understand that, yes, we realize that there are situations that we're needing to deal with, but to your point, what is our strategy to rectify it, and what focus do we have? I don't think that that's going to go away regardless of what is happening in our climate. So great conversation there. You touched a little bit around the complexities of dealing with global organizations and different regulations and whatnot that might be in those global organizations. So with more and more companies having a global presence, I'd like to talk a little bit about the complexities that brings to our total reward strategies. And I think with this one, we'll kick it off with Dave. I know you've got an interesting take on this one.
Yeah, global complexities is the right word. With so many different employees across different continents, there are first of all, compliance and taxation considerations. So for example, with a total reward strategy, a rewards and recognition, a non-cash incentive strategy, we have to be compliant. We have to think about how these things are being taxed. So we actually partner with our friends at Deloitte. And what we do is we want to alleviate the administrative burden. So as we think about expanding, we have to be careful of not putting so much administrative and resource burden on our HR leaders, on our people leaders, to think about the taxation and the compliance. And so what we can do is as we spin up these different rewards programs, we can help them understand with the data integration into our tool how it's going to be taxed. How do we stay compliant? So there's that, and we have to find scalable solutions, whether that's systematic or we can't always just hire more heads. And so finding scalable, systematic solutions to help us understand how we stay compliant in those reward strategies is key. The second part is different cultures, the nuances of where our offices are, where our employees are, how they prefer to be compensated, how they prefer to be recognized, rewarded is very different. We see that across, again, 140 different countries. Some companies, global companies, will reward their employees differently in one area of the world than a different area of the world. There is, to the topic of transparency, there's always exchange rates, and there's many things that, what do we keep private versus what do we, what do we publish? Our employees talking, with one another on how they're being rewarded. But what we're seeing is that ability to be personalized. We talked about employee choice. Offering employee choice according to the cultural nuances and preferences of people throughout the globe is key. For example, we have a number of customers in South America, and prepaid cell phones are very common. And so we have customers who offer through our program mobile top-up solutions. That's not going to be something that's very interesting probably in other parts of the world, just how cell phones work and whatnot. So being able to customize those programs, allow for those cultural nuances, those preferences, the employee choice is key. And then whatever we can do to alleviate that administrative burden in staying compliant and making sure we're taxing correctly is key, in kind of how we might help serve the things that all of us, especially our HR heroes out there are doing. And it can be very complex, but personalization is key, and choice.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Dave, with your points. I think personalization is huge. And I think coming from the platform side of things, that to me brings up communication, right? How are we communicating these localizations, these nuances that these different employee groups have? And are we making sure that they're equally valued across the board? So I think, here at HRSoft, we have a number of clients. Most of them are global, with employees outside of the US. And a lot of them do like to make that communication dynamic in nature, right? Looking at where an employee sits, what's their role, what's their position in the organization, and having that communication personalized to them in that extent, so that they do see the value and it resonates with them, and that story that we're telling them is going to be compelling.
I think it's, again, Michael, I think that's a really good point. On the global complexities of total reward, I think the only thing I'd add on this is I don't think it's ever been more challenging to create a global compensation strategy for any kind of global business. I think you have such disparity in terms of not just legislatively, as Dave referred to, and look, in Europe, it is country to country. You have some very, very strict rules around not just executive pay, but in financial services that are now slightly softening in the UK, that are non-existent in the US. Just shareholder power in Europe versus shareholder power. I think, so if you're trying to create a global philosophy or a global compensation strategy, I think it's nigh on impossible. And I think, there is always this battle when we're talking with clients around, do we hire a global head or do we hire regional leaders who are going to report up, and you have a group central sort of philosophy. I'm reluctant to give the perfect solution on that, but I don't think it's ever been more challenging to create anything kind of global from a TR space. Even just the concept of wealth creation. If you look at wealth creation, the idea of wealth creation in the US versus the wealth creation in France or the Netherlands or the United Kingdom, the way people view executives and executive pay differs between all four of those countries. So how do you create an offering that works? I mean, well, you have to be a genius, but yeah, I don't think it's been a tougher time for it at the moment.
Well, and that even bleeds into the nuances of how you're looking at different types of benefits that we mentioned as well, those well-being programs that we talk about, and even the traditional healthcare type benefits, the value of those, and where those are really not an added value at all because of those particular jurisdictions. So I think that's an interesting take on it. Definitely a lot to take into account. So with that, I do want to kick off into our last polling question here. So let me go ahead and share that and give you a few seconds to respond to this one. What is your biggest challenge currently in your organization that as you're facing in evolving its total reward strategies? So what is that one biggest challenge that you have? Again, you might be surprised by the responses here, but it'd be interesting to understand where we're seeing some challenges. All right, interesting. Slightly surprised by that, but not necessarily. Looking at budget constraints as really being the main challenge here, and then next 2 and 3, communicating the program value and measuring the impact of the rewards, I think those are very closely tied as well. Any specific commentary around that?
Jump in on that one, if only because if you think about what came in 1, 2, and 3 there, this is all about maximizing the budget allocation for total rewards and doing so in a way that you're amplifying the experience that you're trying to create, but manage the balance sheet impact. And that's the weights that the HR professional plays with every day. The one thing that I would just share that a lot of organizations are doing is this idea of shifting away from presuming that HR knows the answer and actually asking employees, like, what's going to resonate? What do you prefer? What do you need? What are you concerned about? Right. And then making thoughtful decisions on the offerings that meet and exceed those expectations. Conjoint surveys have become, first nuance, now really part of the norm from an HR perspective on soliciting input from the workforce and actionable input from the workforce, forced ranked input from the workforce, and then making strategic decisions about how and where to invest based on what the workforce told you. And, Glizcel, I think that when you do that, you stop this idea of trying to keep up with the Joneses and you become the Joneses, right? Because you know what your workforce wants and you're allocating the money based on what's going to resonate to the people that you value most.
I think that's
sense
a
to
really,
me.
yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's a great point about kind of going to the employees and getting that feedback from them in terms of what's going to resonate. And I think a piece of that as well is going to be the communication, right? Do these employees understand what they have today? And are we using all the tools available to us to make sure they do comprehend the different programs and benefits that they have? And so I think from a digital platform perspective, it does offer you a lot of different tool sets to be able to engage and interact with these employees. So that is not just that statement or that once a year conversation, but something that employees can come back to, engage with, whether it be a what if or a scenario model or something of that nature where they can play around with kind of their numbers and see the impact it has. I do think that goes a long way in them comprehending what they do have today so that when they are providing that feedback, it is informed feedback. So that as you make your decisions, it's going to be the best path forward. The other thing that I'll quickly note just on the topic of communication is we focus a lot on kind of the what we're putting out there. And I think there also needs to be some thought put into how, right? I think every organization that we've worked at, we could probably recite off what kind of a culture it had. What was the DNA of that organization? And I think being able to kind of embody that in the communication is going to go a long way in making sure that employees are receiving that information in a way that makes sense, right? And so that's another thing I just wanted to point out kind of in terms of not just the what, but the how and being able to reflect kind of who you are as an organization in your communications.
I think there's a little point on there, Michael, is the world's moved on from total reward statements. In terms of just giving someone a little piece of paper or a little slip going, "Now look how much money we're spending on all of your benefits." I think, there has to be a better way. And interestingly, we've been asked twice this year, which, I mean, it's a new concept for us, but to hire individuals specialized in total rewards communication. So their job is going to be to communicate. And in some cases, very complex programs, but I think organizations are starting to wake up to the value of, look, we can't just send them a little statement each year. We've got to actually, whether it's verbally, whether it's in presentation, whether it's really getting into the heartbeat of the business and talking to people about their rewards. And I think that's a trend that's set to continue.
Interesting. I think also, just to add to that, it's a combination of, to your point, what and how, but specifically, what are we actually including in that? We've talked about the message that we're trying to get to our employees about the actual strategies, the why, around those strategies as well. And I think having that clear concise communication to help them understand the true value of their total rewards package. And especially as you start getting into some of the complexities there, that needs to be there front and center as well. I think that's super important.
Glizcel, I would like to add one thing. I love the topic of employee listening that Michael brought up. We've seen this with leaders we've worked with. The cautionary tale there is, don't pulse your employees, don't survey them unless you're, one, willing to see the results, but two, more importantly, are ready to act on them. Because nothing will erode the foundation of trust our employees have in us faster than asking them what they think, feel, wish, or need, and then not rolling out any action plans or changes to accomplish our goals. And so I've been with leaders before where, the C-suite might see a response to an employee listening, survey and want to dismiss it because it's not what they wanted to see, or didn't necessarily have the programs or the plans or the actions to resolve certain issues. So it's one thing to be aware of as we work, top down culturally, that with employee listening comes responsibility of acting on those as soon as we can if we don't want to erode the trust of our employee base.
It makes total sense. I think also just double clicking on that, it gives a different sense of what transparency actually means. If you're starting to think about pulse surveys, are you going to be transparent about the results of those? And then to your point, transparent about what your action plan is around those pulse surveys. So you definitely need to be ready for that. Michael, I was just curious, double clicking on that a little bit too, thinking about what transparency really looks like and the fact that employees have access to so much information. Do you have anything else to add to that too?
Just that, if you think about communications over the years, and we've got some great total rewards thinkers here. It used to be about this much information in this long of an email that was sent out in blast format, right? And nothing can get an employee's attention worse than that type of approach. And I think where you're seeing communications, and I love it because it is now a function within total rewards, a total rewards communication specialist sitting amongst that team, thinking about things like branding and frequency and channel. And then things like personalization, right? That there is a litany of offerings that are generally available at most companies, but there's some things that are and are not going to resonate to the workforce. And so thinking deliberately about a structure of communication, a channel, a single source answer where employees can find information about benefits relevant to them and where they are in both their personal and professional journey, starting to see that a lot more, right? And I think that when you can curate that experience, right, and it's not go out to the intranet and go 6 or 7 clicks deep to find something, right? If the experience can be brought together, if it can be personalized, all of a sudden the employee, though you haven't changed your offerings, the employees see things that are, both what they were looking for and the happy accidents of the things that they didn't know existed, but that they absolutely needed. That's, it's such a change in the way that total rewards and communications have collaborated together, of thinking about their customer and designing that experience very specifically to meet those needs. I do think if we look 10 years ago, the technology and the integrations of both providers and then the internal support team, it was a real challenge. But thankfully, technology is moving a million miles an hour, and it's creating this opportunity where you can have these integrations, where you can have, to Dave's point earlier, like this idea of a personalized experience that shows you things that are relevant based on your information, and maybe removes those things that aren't relevant based on where you are, again, personally and professionally. So I love what I'm seeing from this trend because employees value the idea of transparency, expediency, finding information, ingesting, taking action, and then moving on.
Most definitely. Thank you for that. So this wouldn't be a webinar about trends without asking the crystal ball question. So just curious, as we kind of come to a close here, I want to know, if you had a crystal ball, what do you think total rewards would look like 5 or 6 years down the line? And I think for this one, let's go ahead and kick it off with Dave, and we can start to pass it around. I want to hear a little bit from everybody here.
Yeah, a couple of things that we're seeing and that we're studying, obviously with the applications of AI within HR. Obviously, we don't view it as replacing human efforts, but augmenting the data and the ability to make sense of data, employee data across so many different siloed systems that we have internally. And where we kind of see that going, and as we speak, with partners and as we speak with customers, the one thing we're in the business of is providing an incredible, place of employment, a great employee journey that we have with our employees. But more importantly, we want our best ones to stick around. And so attrition is always top of mind for the leaders we're interacting with. And so what we where we see this going, and what we're already seeing as we run some test models, is the ability to take these existing data sets of performance, of who somebody is, but combine them now with new data sets, such as how do they prefer to be rewarded, to be recognized. We all see top performers regrettably leave our companies. Often that's a recognition issue. But what we see is all these data sets coming together to properly predict, incentivize, and lay a path of what performance looks like to keep the best people with us, help them progress in their careers, and being more predictive and insightful and proactive in that to, put out risk factors on somebody who might appear from a performance standpoint on just, whether it's sales quota or what it might be, they might be doing particularly well. But if we combine that with some predictive data sets, utilizing, again, the AI that we have access to, we might flag a risk of somebody who's actually, thinking about leaving the company based on the benchmarks and the comparisons that we're seeing. So overall, again, as we work with partners, as we talk with customers, the ability to keep our employees at our companies to provide a very insightful and a fruitful employee journey throughout does come down to having more access to data now, being able to synthesize and make more sense of that data. So we see that, total rewards being a huge part of that, because again, we've so much been focused on performance data. How do you perform? But total rewards, one, we need to compensate how you're performing, but there's a whole nother element of how personalized and risk factors and or insights that we can combine with that traditional performance data.
Right.
I'd say I think my kind of thoughts align very closely to Dave with yours in terms of, I think that personalization is going to be even bigger over the next 4 to 5 years, perhaps to levels that we can't even comprehend right now. I think just with the introduction of AI in a lot of our digital platforms and the robustness of those systems, and as Michael said, technology going a million miles a minute, I think it's going to open up new opportunities for organizations to really get granular on that personalization and be able to do it at scale, right? Because I think today we still are running in some roadblocks in terms of managing some of those nuances and being able to properly roll out those types of programs. But I do think technology is going to be a big enabler of that going forward over the next little while.
I think we're all probably going to see a similar vein around technology. I think when you asked me this, I thought a while ago, transparency is going to be the thing that is going to increase because obviously whilst we, and total rewards professionals will have access to technology to enable them and speed up our processes, other individuals and employees will also have the same. So I think an individual's understanding of market worth and what they should be paid and what they should be receiving will increase to a dramatic level in the coming years, where it'll be very hard to sort of create outliers in pay and sort of pay data, because you can't sit there and say, well, we pay it in the sort of 55 to 65th percentile, because everyone will go, well, I'm worth this, and they'll have data instantly at their hands to back that up, rather than saying, oh, my mate Bob down the road, he earns X and he does a similar job to me. I think it's going to create a headache. It's an opportunity, but it's going to be a challenge for total rewards professionals to really maintain pace with an increasing wage bill, as salaries, I can't see them suddenly flatlining. Your role to maintain being competitive is going to be challenged. You'll have to continuously refresh, and if anything, increase that wage bill year on year on year. So yeah, I think it's going to be a tough one.
Maybe just one last add. And it was years ago, I was working with a client, and we were talking about the experience of trying to navigate the intranet at that organization to find benefits. And I'll remember this line for my whole career. The person said, "Our intranet's like my basement. I know everything's down there. I just don't know how to find it." Right? It was like a light bulb moment where the solution, and you're starting to see this a lot now, right? The solution is to curate an experience that employees can find things, right? And then, as I look into the crystal ball, it's augmented with, AI to create nudges of, we're seeing this in your data. Here's a benefit that might be able to help. Or, here's what employees in your type of situation are really utilizing, right? Because the breadth of offerings at most companies is usually far beyond the average employee's awareness. But the amount of financial commitment to those benefits is significant. Like, employers want the employees to utilize, but employees need to know that it's there. I think what you're going to see is a focus on that experience, that it's not about continuous expansion of breadth and depth of programs. It's the idea of, we are going to help you understand what's being offered and nudge you to utilize it at a time that really matters, at that moment that matters, where this benefit needs to show up. I could see that really becoming much more of an aim and focus of organizations over the next few years.
Thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense. So I did want to have, it looks like we have at least a couple of minutes to take some questions. We have had a couple come in, and it actually comes straight from some of the topics that we just covered. The first one that's out here is for pay transparency. What is the best approach for an organization in the mining sector? I don't know if Jamie, you might be the best one to respond to that one.
I'll be quick about it. Lean into it. I think I've heard multiple different variations of how clients have tried to address in terms of gender pay gap and how they report it internally. There's no cover up. You need to embrace the statistics are never going to be great. You need to celebrate the wins, but you need to come up with a narrative that is transparent, honest, and then actually communicate what you're going to do about it, and take drastic action. I think the braver the client, the braver the action, the sort of better the longer term outcome.
Yeah, and that actually kind of answers the follow-up question to that too. What are the factors to consider when attempting to roll out gender pay equity?
Well, I mean, yeah, I had one client turn around to me back in 2017 saying, maybe we just hire a bunch of low-paid men to address the pay gap. Don't do that. But I think you've got to, again, be bold, be honest and upfront about it, and set out a roadmap for how you're going to solve the issue.
Perfect. Well, with that, we are just in time. Thank you so much to our panelists here for joining us today. I think this has been a great conversation. Hopefully everybody got something out of it. And I will go ahead and turn it back over to Ruth.
All right. Thank you so much to all the panelists for your knowledge and your time with us. All right. And this webinar will be available for playback for up to 90 days. So you simply got to log into your worldatwork.org and access your profile. Please allow 24 hours for the playback to appear. The HRCI and SHRM codes should be available on your screen. Please keep a track of these codes, as they will not be available in the playback of this webinar. Okay, thank you, everyone. This will conclude today's webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.